Welcome to the Painter Marketing Mastermind podcast, a show created to help painting company owners build a thriving painting business that does well over $1 million in annual revenue. I'm your host, Brandon Pierpont, founder of Painter Marketing Pros and creator of the popular PCA educational series Learn, Do, Grow, Marketing for Painters. In each episode, I'll be sharing proven tips, strategies, and processes from leading experts in the industry on how they found success in their painting business. We will be interviewing owners of the most successful painting companies in North America and learning from their experiences. In this series, titled A Painter's Dream, Jason Paris will be discussing what makes the painting industry so attractive to ambitious entrepreneurs and how painting company owners can capitalize on current and future opportunities. It is a 4-part series. In episode 1, the previous episode, we discussed macroeconomic trends and how the ebbs and flows of the economy should affect decision-making and planning within your painting company. In episode 2, this episode, Jason will dive into the influx of young talent into the industry and what that means for all painting company owners. In episode 3, Jason will outline what you need to do in order to make your painting company sellable, allowing you the option for a lucrative exit. And in the final episode, episode 4, Jason will elaborate on his philosophies of business and how they apply to you and your painting company. If you want to ask Jason questions related to anything in this podcast series, you can do so in our exclusive Painter Marketing Mastermind podcast forum on Facebook. Just search for Painter Marketing Mastermind podcast forum on Facebook and request to join the group. Or type in the URL facebook.com/groups/Painter Marketing Mastermind. Again, that URL is facebook.com/groups/Painter Marketing Mastermind. There you can ask Jason questions directly by tagging him with your question so you can see how anything discussed here applies to your particular painting company. Jason is the chair of the board of directors of the PCA and founder of Paris Painting, the most successful painting company that Painter Marketing Pros has worked with to date. Jason, thank you for returning to the show for the second episode.
Oh, wow. That was a mouthful. It's a good intro.
It takes a while. It takes a while. There's a lot to convey. Thanks for coming back, man.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Excited.
So here we are discussing, as you put it, the Wild West gets settled.
Oh, okay. That's the tagline?
That's the tagline. The Wild West gets settled. Let's discuss.
Yeah, so it's kind of good. Let's talk about where we've been, right? So the industry has been the Wild West, right? What's called that. And that's not novel for industries, right? Many industries go through their maturity, their iterations, their evolutions, right? Painting is no different, and they'll probably go through several of those in the next hundreds of years, right? Whatever you want to call it. This also happens to geographies, right? And that's where kind of the metaphor of the Wild West getting settled, I think, is helpful to get this point across, right? So talk about where we've been. The Wild West it's wild and it's westward, right? So we're talking about U.S. geography. The colonies on the east get settled, right? That's where most of the population is. And it's the adventurers, the explorers, the wildcats, the cowboys that are moving west, right? As they move west, they're in kind of uncharted terrain. There's no playbook. There's no secret formula for how to make this work. And they're not doing things necessarily at scale, right? So you've got individual homesteaders that are rough and tumble cowboys. They're good at pretty much everything. They can they can figure out how to rip a tooth out if they need to, so they can kind of play their own dentist. They can obviously farm. They can raise cattle, right? All those things that make it really tough to settle the land. Now, what eventually happens to the Wild West? Well, eventually the Wild West becomes less wild, right? So you've got these kind of cowboys, these settlers that come in and basically settle the land, right? At this point, you have maybe an environment that's less rough and tumble. There's a little bit more of certainty of what works and what doesn't work. And now you can get individuals who are more specialists and I'd say sophisticated in a specialist area to come in and begin to create a lot of value in a geographical area, right? And the reason that can now happen is those are very rare to have crossover skill sets, right? So it's not impossible, it's not never, but it's super rare to have an individual that's rough and tumble like a cowboy, but also super hyper specialized and sophisticated in a very niche area, right? Usually you have an accountant, someone's really, really good at accounting. They're also not a generalist who can do everything and has, cowboy, thick skin, can weather all the elements, right? They're kind of nerdy, they have glasses, and they like their little white collar button up shirt, right? So that's kind of where we've been. I think that's healthy to start there because we're going to talk about young talent coming into the industry, what that influx means, what are the effects for those that are coming in, but also those that are existing, or those that are looking to exit. And I think it's good to first go back kind of where we've been over the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this idea of kind of the jack of all trades, the cowboy in this instance kind of does everything, playing his own dentist, and then having to specialize. I'm curious, are the new talent, are these the guys with the tie and the button down shirt and the accountants? Who's the accountant here?
Yeah, I think it's sophisticated business talent, right?
Okay.
And so if you are a high level business talent, I don't know why you would have gotten into painting over the last 20, 30 years. On a good day, you're building a nice lifestyle business, but there's so many other options to earn a good income and have a nice lifestyle that have much more prestige, right? So it's not like a big magical mystery on why there hasn't been top talent. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. There's some very sophisticated painting businesses out there, but there's not a lot, right? Most of the industry is very unsophisticated, very fragmented, not serving the client well. I think we talked about this in our previous discussions. Most clients are not serviced well when it comes to a professional painting contractor, right? They're hard to find, and they don't consume enough of the market demand to maybe push out or mitigate the poorly run companies, right? Those poorly run companies are allowed to thrive, exist, survive, not because of their own excellence, but because of the lack of volume that sophistication is taking up. Um, but yeah, high level business talent, I would just say, maybe this is another point, it's a lot easier to scale and stabilize a painting businesses now than it was 20 or 30 years ago, right? And so if I don't know how many people listen to the podcast, but there are like entrenched in the industry. But if you started your company 30 years ago, you had a lot harder time, right? Kids these days are lazier. They do have it easier. That just is that's like progression of life, right? People
Yeah.
hopefully have it easier every generation. They have their own kind of novelties and challenges as well. But 30 years ago, you didn't have the access to information that we have now, right? And I call that from a technical side, right? Everyone's kind of making up their own what works.
Yeah.
The prevalence of standards throughout the industry were not uniform, right? So you didn't have like, well, this is what everybody agrees that this is a finished surface, and we can all agree on that, right? You're gonna have to be like a tough cowboy, stand up for yourself, have that skill set and those competencies, say like, no, this is complete, this is acceptable, and here's why, right? Everyone's kind of doing that on their own in their own little islands. How do you train someone? What's the most novel, most effective combination of products to achieve a certain result? Right? That was much more siloed 30 years ago. Obviously, internet would be like a through line through all these elements of why it's a lot easier. But yeah, there's like the technical information, then there's the practical information of how you scale a business, what do comp structures look like, what's a typical org chart look like at different scales of a business. That's like there for anybody right now,
Yeah.
right? Through the PCA or a coaching entity or any of the multitude of Facebook groups or social media groups that are out there. If you're like curious, how do I fairly compensate a sales rep in my painting company? That's not a mystery box that you have to be a cowboy at, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to make the mistakes. You don't have to have the tough skin. It's kind of like, here's the template for you. And that just wasn't there 20, 30 years ago. It's a lot easier nowadays. I'd say also something that's novel nowadays is people have a lot more camaraderie and community.
Mm.
You had put a question out to your Facebook group of people that want to ask a question and call it anecdotal. Painters of previous generations are a lot more standoffish when it comes to
Yeah.
cooperation, as I've coined it, right? Kind of like that person, if they're successful, that takes food off of my plate. Right now, in any metro market, those numbers just don't play out. I'd say most rural markets, it probably doesn't play out super strongly as well. The market is so large and businesses are so fragmented. Your only competition is your ability to execute your business model, right? It's not like if that painting company does well, I do poorly. It's such a blue ocean of an industry as we sit here in 2022 that's not the prime. Competing against others is not the primary focus of a company that's successful. The primary focus is how well do you execute your systems and your business model.
Yeah.
But that camaraderie, that community was not there 20, 30 years ago. Nowadays, it's very prevalent. So 20, 30 years ago, you had to be a tough cowboy mentally, right? Because it's very lonely at the top. It's very lonely to be an entrepreneur. It's very it just eats away at your psyche when you don't know if what you're doing is right or wrong. Most of the people in your circles can't relate to you because they're not entrepreneurial and you are, and you're taking these risks, your highs and lows and all those things. Now you don't have to have that thick skin that a cowboy would have. That camaraderie, that community is available through you to you through events, the PCA, social media groups, local gatherings that have been popping up over the last 2 years, right? Uh, that is very different, and that's just going to, you could say it's twofold. One, it attracts a different type of individual, but also allows the attraction of individuals that maybe wouldn't have been allowed to survive, much less thrive in the past. Um,
Sure.
Two other things that I think are different that make it easier for kids nowadays. Technology tools, right? So we talk about scaling and stabilizing a painting
Yep.
company. That's hard to do off a beeper and a mobile phone, not even a mobile phone, a landline, right? So how do you do that? How do you have real time communication? The level of sophistication that people have access to now is just, it's a lot easier to scale your company right now than it was 20, 30 years ago. The
Sure.
technology is just so sophisticated, and that's real-time communication flow, reporting to make real-time managerial decisions. That's just a lot different than it is right now. Right. Last item I would say that is both attracting different talent, but also allowing different talent to survive would be consumer preferences. And this is going to be anecdotal as well, but it feels like, I don't know, you could call it the loss of community in America, right? The suburbanification of the U.S. But there's consumer preferences. They don't have to know the deep personal history of everybody that's on a job site. It's becoming much more transactional and much less relational.
Yep.
So it's the ability for consumers to have a product that is scalable versus having a demand preference that necessitates niching down what you're able to offer as a service. I think that makes it easier for people these days as well to scale and stabilize their company.
Sure. Yeah, I actually have a roundtable that I'm conducting later today with the PCA with Nice Job and reputation management and reviews. And I think it ties into kind of what you're talking about there. It's all about, okay, who has the best reviews? All right, I'll go with you. It's not as much focus. There's still some in terms of trust and everything, but it's not as much focus as you've been a neighborhood painting company for X, Y, or Z years. They just want to know you're going to produce the results. You're going to guarantee your work. People are happy, and you're going to do it for a way that's not going to absolutely destroy their budget. Right.
Yeah. I think there's a little bit of consumer preference. There's also just general market conditions. So, the gap between supply and demand is so high right now that the novel value prop, like you don't have, it's not bad. Like I said, over the last 10 years, firms like yours have been pretty useless.
Thanks. Hey, I love these podcast interviews, man. They're such a pick me up for me.
It's just like, why would you spend time doing a story brand when that's not your limiting factor? So like companies are like going through these large like story brand exercises and really figuring out all that, marketing stuff. I'll tell you your value prop as a painting company over the last 10 years. You show up and you say, I paint. All right, that's your value prop. If you show up and say, I paint, that's what you need to do to win over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And gosh, we were spoiled and we have been spoiled. And anybody started a painting company in the last 10 years, it's like, how could you not have succeeded, quite frankly? So I think that's something that we'll look back on in the decades to come and say, what a novel time in history that was, where your value prop truly was I paint, and you could just dominate the market just by being able to execute operationally. Do the marketing, but that was not the limiting factor for most painting companies. Now, I always tear you down to bring you back up. Now, looking forward the next 10 years, hopefully that's different, right? Whether it's we have some macroeconomic trends that we talked about in the last episode that are real. Some of them are anecdotal, but there are like the hard numbers of consumer confidence, interest rate, and inflation. Those are real numbers that affect behavior. And then we might be at a low point of talent in the industry, right? And so the supply side, so demand's never been higher. That's starting to shift. Supply has never been lower. My hypothesis is that will shift. Those two things then make it a little bit to where a firm like yours has actual value in the marketplace. And
awesome.
You can sleep at night knowing that what you're doing is helpful to companies, not just selling what they want to hear.
Might have some value. All right, that's what I like to hear. Step in the right direction. So I want to kind of back up to what you talked about with why there hasn't already been this influx of talent. You know, you mentioned that there are a lot of smart business people in the country. Why up until now, especially with such a supply demand gap over the past 10 years, why do you think that more sophisticated business people did not enter the painting industry?
Yeah, I guess I should be careful here. I don't want to make this like a bashing of if you're a painter today, you're an idiot, and
Yeah,
you're
there are some very
are,
sophisticated painters,
and most of
but
the
as a
people that listen to
whole,
this podcast are the cream of the
yeah,
crop. It's just
yeah,
there's a
these are the top.
reality of if I go to a if I went to a cocktail party, which is hilarious because I would never do that. If I went to a cocktail party and said, "Yeah, I own a little painting company," or "I own a painting company," what do people think about you immediately? They're like, "I'm
Think
really
you're paying. They
really
think you're
glad
doing
you're not
something
on welfare. That's so great that you don't have to pass a drug test and you can still provide for yourself. Like these are all great things.
right.
People think that for a reason because it's the state of the industry today, right?
Sure,
And I'm not talking to your audience. I'm not talking to the guy in his 40s and 50s and has run a successful company
sure.
and providing phenomenal service to both his employees, his clients, and the business is profitable. Right? I think some of those guys might hear what I'm saying, or gals could hear what I'm saying and say, "Wow, Jason is really talking down to us." That's not what I'm doing. So I just want to be careful with that. But yeah, why has talent not been driven in when there's that supply and demand gap, which is code language for profit, right? So anytime any entrepreneur, opportunity arises when there's a supply and demand gap, right?
Yeah,
That's code for profit. Handful of things. One, top level talent hasn't been tough enough, right? For all the things I've listed, they wouldn't have been able to make it without access to information, access to community and camaraderie, the technology tools that are in place now, and consumer preferences that are driving things, right? So, the specialized talent could certainly try to run a painting company, but they would have failed, right? Because they're not tough like a cowboy. You don't have to be tough like a cowboy anymore. I think that's one major driver. But I think that's been changing like over the past 5, 10 years, right? And so I think there will be a push of talent into the industry. Why hasn't that happened overnight? Part of that's societal pressure, right? So if you're a senior in college and about to graduate, you're at the Christmas party with your cousins and family and whatnot, and you say, "Yeah, I'm really looking forward to graduating and starting a painting company." Um, when your cousin Mary Sue says, "Yeah, I'm looking to graduate and become a pixel pusher at XYZ talent," I don't know, what do people get to, what do kids do? They graduate into these tech jobs that aren't real. Though
yeah,
that has much more societal prestige uh, than the hard work of a painting company. So I
sure.
think societal pressure has been a real thing. But I think a lot of it has been, it just wouldn't have worked, right? Uh, Painting is a tough business. It's becoming less and less tough. Kind of those 4 key elements that I've listed out. Um, but yeah, I don't think dentists and accountants and lawyers would have settled the Wild West either, right?
Yeah,
They would have gotten out in there and they would have gotten sunburn and been toast for 3 days. Like, oh, my sun is burnt or my skin is burnt. I can't plow the land today, right? Or I went out there and plowed and I pulled a hammy and now I'm done so, right? Versus the cowboy gets out there, they've got thick skin, they're workhorses, they have that is it the Presbyterian work ethic? They just get out there and grind every single day, and
yeah,
you know those people do have to lead the way. And the novelty of generational stacking is over time, the micro improvements are made until it just becomes a much more fertile land. It's a much more softer community that
sure.
allows the specialists to come in. So
So, so
I
you
think it's
think
better time.
you think that there has that some specialists and people like that have come in, but it sounds to me like you foresee a big influx maybe in the next 5 or 10 years. Is that kind of how you're seeing this?
Yeah, well, there's 2 points to that. One, I would just say over the last 3 years, I think you and I have both met individuals that have stepped in, and these
Yep.
are guys that are in their guys and gals, they're in their mid 20s, late 20s, early 30s, and
Yep.
they've accomplished like what even 5, 10 years ago would have been like, wow, that's amazing, right?
Yeah.
And so I think whatever you call your benchmark, I'd say like 10 years ago, if you're a $1 or $2 million company, it's like, holy cow. I'm talking to
Sure.
residential repaint. It's like, holy cow, that person is like a monster.
Right.
Now that's like year one, year two. These people
Yeah.
are right now.
Yeah.
And it's not
It's
everybody.
insane.
I'm not trying down. It's not a numbers. It's not like a volume game. So I'm not trying to down talk anybody. But I'm just saying the incidence of quickly rising companies through young adopters is increasing, right? And I'd say whether that's anecdotal or I would say it's stats driven. I'm sure it could be. That's what we're starting to see. So that's part of it. I would also just say this is not a novel concept. This certainly has been happening in different areas of the economy. So the ones I always go back to is farming was a very, very tough business, right, for a long, long, long time. Now it's driven by actuarians, right? It's basically an insurance game, and it's a big churn, and it's like basically leveraging cash to build the infrastructure, and then the insurance is cast down on it. The cowboys, the farmers of today are a lot different than the farmers of decades past. Let's put it that way. Same thing as brewing, right? So you think about the MBA grad, right? Think about an MBA grad. They're coming out of Penn State, and it's like, yeah, I'm going to be a farmer. That actually makes sense, right? Because you can use those skill sets in the farming industry now and generate multi-million dollars worth of wealth, right? You say the same thing with brewing, becoming a brewer now. Like typically, decades, generations past, if you said, I'm about to graduate, from Michigan State, wherever, and I've got my MBA, and I'm going to start a brewery. You're like, wow, you're really have settled in life, right?
Yeah.
That's an odd choice. Now it's like, oh, that makes sense, right? Because there's just this paradigm of you can build a brewery, set it up to a point, and then either partner with or merge with, do an M&A, or completely liquidate to a larger corporation, larger company. Right? That's a common practice. Trying to see that a little bit in HVAC or the licensed trades, as you call it. So again, just think about that MBA grad sitting down at Thanksgiving dinner. It's like, yeah, I'm going to be starting a electrical company, or an HVAC company, a plumbing company. People are like, oh, that makes sense. Right? I can see why you would do that. Those are good businesses, sophisticated businesses. Your skill sets will cross over.
Sure.
Things, right? Painting isn't quite there yet, but I think it will be, and it will start to be. Right? I think we're kind of on the tip of that spear, driving forward.
Yeah. So I want to, so like you mentioned, I put up a post in the Facebook group where we have the forum discuss the podcast, and you answered Zach Osterman's question about basically how does this work with the old timers, so to speak, the guys who've been in the industry for a long time. How does collaboration what did you call it?
Cooperation.
Cooperation.
That was something I started saying in it was 2018, and
okay.
I said it kind of hit wildfire. I'm sure someone else has used that word in the past.
Yeah. You trademarked it though, so it's the.
I'll trademark it for like my sphere of influence. But
okay, all right. So you've trademarked it. So another question that came through, and I want to address it because it's relevant to what you're talking about right now, was from Win Monroe. It says, "What new technologies, equipment, and offered services are raising the bar in the industry?" So here's kind of where you're talking about, how things have changed. What things are differentiating the top players in the industry from the rest?
Okay, there's kind of two questions there. Like technology and tools and services that are raising the bar. Those are kind of like, I can give you some like broad topics, which would be the four that I laid out. So access information, camaraderie, communication, or camaraderie, technology, tools, consumer preferences. Specifically, whether you call it an ERP or CRM or estimating software that connects to a project management software, which connects to an accounting software, right? All of these software type tools are certainly raising the bar from pen to paper, right? And that's for real-time information transfer, accuracy and human error reduction, archiving, retrieval, speed, the ability to flow information from one unit of the company to another. Those are all just markedly different than they were years ago. And so that has certainly raised the bar of what is possible. But again, it kind of that evolution of the tools that are available now makes certain people's skill sets much more leverageable, right? So again, if you're a very architect like process architecture type mind, your skill sets would not have been that rewarded 10, 20 years ago in painting, right?
Sure.
It's like there's a lot of other industries where you would step into as like a nerd and be pretty successful. Now you can come to painting and you've got all these tools that leverage your skill sets. That's pretty new. That's pretty novel.
Building those systems.
Yeah, building systems that have, they're just leveraged through technology. I'm not saying you can't build and operate systems off of paper. There have been great painting companies that have existed that have been built over either decades or generations. Just the speed that's happening at now, the level of reward for certain skill sets is high enough now that's going to start to draw that talent into the market and into the industry. Services would be the same thing. So, in the Wild West, you have to be good at everything. You have a weak spot, it's going to be a hard detriment to the company. You're going to have to recruit that internally. As this industry continues to mature, you'll have more and more of these kind of services offerings, right? So just the proliferation of coaching companies in the painting space is large, right?
Yeah.
You don't see this level of consultative or coaching services in like the dental practices, right? Because they mostly know what they're doing at this point. There's like a handful, it's mostly consolidated. There's large holdings companies, like it's not a like a big mystery box. But in painting, it's a big mystery box. People are starting to figure it out. And you just have like an odd amount of coaching services based and consultative type companies.
Yeah.
And you know that, right? You're obviously competing in that space.
Yeah.
So I'd say, like, if you were to look like at your SWOT analysis, it's like, wow, the number of competitors that are like trying to do what you're doing, what you have been doing, does not decrease every single year. Right. But that I would say overall that does help raise the standard of the industry, right? Because now you can walk into a painting company, have some novel skill sets that typically weren't rewarded but are rewarded now, have a blind spot, and have a couple of options on how you solve that blind spot. Right. One would be the services that are offered in the industry. The second part of that question was, what are the top players doing that's different from the rest? That's a wide base. I think the first answer would be they're world-class at leveraging a team and utilizing a team of people as opposed to doing everything on their own. Right. So that's the first thing that an owner-operated painting company is both driven by, but also governed or harnessed by the owner-operator. And there's just a market difference, like a very, very tangible, philosophical, results-oriented difference than someone who is the business and someone who's leveraging a team of people that becomes the business. Right. And so I'd say that's what like the top players are doing that's different is the business is not them. They're not the identity of the company. There's so many owner operators are just such phenomenal, talented, hardworking, gritty people that it's a great use of their life to drive a company to a certain point. Right. So I don't want to minimize that. But they also become the governor limiting factor on how much that business can scale and grow. And that's what like the top players are doing is they're not limiting their company.
Right. Yeah, that actually ties in with something Skylar Stewart asked, which was it would be good to hear about giving away your current job in the company to move on to the next bigger thing. Few companies ever get sales and project managers, even fewer ever build leadership teams. What's the mindset? Is that hard, and how to pick the right people?
Yeah. So there's a lot of questions in there. But yes, it is hard. Right. And so I'd say you have to be pretty good at ego death, as I would call it. Right. Because, most painting companies are not creative people. Right. They are like last name painting, right? Or first name painting or something like that. So to let go of that requires quite a bit of ego death. And that is hard. Anyone who's been through that, they're going to struggle with what do I do next? What am I good at? Where do I fit in the world? I think entrepreneurs actually, that's like a general human need is where do I fit in the world and where can I provide value and how am I putting my talents to use? I think entrepreneurs feel that way a little more than the general population does. And so it can be especially hard for those individuals. So that certainly is tough. The mindset is one of ego death, I guess I call it. How do you pick the right team? Right, that's going to be driven by your values and your vision. Right, and so we're fans of traction over here, and so we like to think about 5 key roles and five key people and 5 key seats. And once you achieve that, there's quite a bit of stability. I think that's like the first building block of stability in your company. And then those individuals, they have to not just fit, but be drivers of the values in your company. And then really, when you think about the vision, 3 years, what's 3, 5, 10-year picture, those people have to be in those seats when you think about that vision. So
yeah, that makes sense. So people's the hardest part of business, I think. It's also the most important, once you get to a certain level of scale. So I kind of want to dive in. We talked about why this talent hasn't historically been super present in the painting industry, so which has allowed a lot of people who haven't really professionalized their business to succeed and thrive and remain in business. And now, due to societal shifts, due to technology shifts that are empowering people who maybe are not cowboys, can come in and actually succeed, and rewarding those process oriented kind of nerdy type people who can actually implement the business systems. It's not going to reward them. So now we're going to see this influx of talent, right? These influx of new entrants that have something new to offer, and really are going to challenge a lot of these older painting companies that haven't embraced this professionalization. What can companies that are either new, they're newer and they're starting now, or that have been here for a long time, how do they adapt? What's their game plan for the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. So if you've been around for a long time, you've been super spoiled. I should say that. The last 10 years
It's
have been,
good to know. It's good to recognize, because
and
otherwise it's just going
and
to
I
be
would say
kicked in
we've
the teeth.
all been super spoiled.
Yeah.
It's been way, and this is like one of the biggest like complaints or cries is like, oh, we're always undercut by the truck in the trucks and the Mike on a bike and the stands in the vans, and like that is a challenge in the industry, right? That is a challenge. A large portion of the industry doesn't understand how a job costs, has a business model that puts them out of business as soon as they find out what taxes are. And that can be a challenge, right? So it's kind of like reconciling, like, yes, that has been hard, but like it's a double-edged sword, right? Supply feels like it can only go up from here. And I'm always been of the mindset of there's not a labor shortage, there's an entrepreneurial shortage, right? So best painting companies, they recruit, attract, and then train their labor. They're not complaining that their network isn't coming to work for them, right? Which is the first problem that a painting company that tries to coast runs into. So it's the largest crime industry. But yeah, those are my. So if you've been established and it's just reconciling, it's been easier than it needs to be. It's been easier than it should be, and it's going to be harder, right? And we've talked about kind of the 3 layers of professionalization, and on the previous podcast, you need to really make sure you're treating your clients well, right? World class. You can't just answer their calls some of the time. You can't call them back some of the time. You can't like say I'm going to give you a bid and then give bids like 3/4 of your estimates that you do. You're gonna have to really get sharp on how you treat your clients on all phases, right? The second is like you really have to treat your employees well. And so you can't just say, come work for me. I'll pay you this much per hour, and you're not gonna have a job description. Your training plan is gonna be osmosis by working next to me, and there should be no intentionality or future or communication or camaraderie or like just every element of how you craft good labor retention and optimize their talents. You're gonna have to get sharper at that. Right. And then the last element is, do you actually have a business that works, where the business model is sophisticated and delivers a profit outside of the wages of those who are driving it the day to day, right? Yeah. And that like works when it's like a boom economy or like a super boom economy. We've had like the super COVID boom that we had over the last 2 or 3 years, where everyone's flush with cash. They don't have expenses that are typically coming up through travel and entertainment. And so it's like a super boost charge that's coming through. You just like get by. And it's like, well, like it's so easy for me to get work because I'm charging lower than everybody else. It's even easier. I'm booked out. I don't have to like plan. And I can treat my clients like terribly. And there's always another one. Now you have to make sure that you are starting to charge appropriately, because you're going to need those profits, because everything's going to get squeezed a little bit tighter. If you don't have that margin, it's kind of like, I don't know, there's a million different metaphors around this, but we use it as one metaphor we use in our company is relational equity. If you don't have relational equity with people, and then you go into the roughness of a business, if you're on empty, it'll tip you over, right? But if you have a little bit of margin, you're going to hit that down patch and you're still survive. So that's what I think. If you're already established, what you should do. If you're coming in new, I just say have an open mind, open paradigm, first principles reasoning. It's a fun place it's like the general human condition. It's a fun time to be alive, because there's not much that's established and set in stone that doesn't need to be revisited, right? And that's just like the time that we're in as a species. Like everything is like ripe and out and ready to be optimized and iterated. Painting companies would be no exception to that. So if you're like thinking like, gosh, it's kind of odd that we do it this way, it probably is odd. And don't be afraid to adapt, try something new, because the wisdom of old, it's kind of like the system effect. I hope someday someone will let me talk about this, but there's keyboards, right? Keyboards were designed in a way to solve problems that we no longer deal with, right? And so like you have keyboards and they're ordered a certain way, so the mechanical triggers don't jam when they do that thing. Now with electronic keyboards, there's no jamming, but we still have this design to solve the problem of jamming, right? Painting companies were very intelligently designed 10, 20 years ago, right? The way the companies operate made a ton of sense for the environment of that time. The environment has changed so much over the last 10, 20 years that they're no longer solving problems that are kind of in the marketplace or in that environment anymore. So if you're someone that's new to coming in, I would say, expect to be sharp, expect to be on the game. Don't be afraid to try different things. Your idea might be the best idea, and it's just have the energy. It's an exciting place to be.
Yeah, no, I think that's powerful. I think when you're new, it can be intimidating. These guys have been here 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and you feel like you don't really know what you're doing, but there's also a strength in that you're evaluating every process for the very first time. And so maybe you see something that doesn't really make sense, but because they've been doing it for 20 years, they're never going to look at it or question it.
Yeah, their success was largely driven by being in the right place, right time. Right? If you start a painting company last 10 years, right place, right time, congratulations, your success, more than likely.
Yeah.
Right? Had this extreme boost, and we've always operated in a tailwind, right? Ever since the 2008 recession was over, that only accentuated what was already becoming more and more of an issue of the supply and demand gap. Then supply really dropped down, and it wasn't too long until demand shot back up. So you've been in this crazy tailwind of an environment as a company, right? So you've been very successful, but don't credit your success to the wrong things. I guess that'd be like for new people coming in, and those are already established. Don't make your crediting the wrong things for success. Right? So you're coming in, you see this company, it's operating, like, gosh, that looks wildly inefficient. Their leadership style is not optimized. The way that they're maximizing the talent of every individual in their company is super sloppy, but they're successful, so it must be the way to do it. Like, no, the reason they're successful is largely because of where they've been and what they've done in an environment that made a lot of sense back then, right?
Sure.
The environment's different, right? And what they're doing now may not be the most optimized thing, but they're at the top, right? So don't conflate that. Same thing if you're on that side. It's like, gosh, we've always done it this way. We are where we are because of how we've done things, and the way you were doing things was super optimized for the environment you were in, right? And that's where you're super successful. It's not because of this specific tactic. You should always be reevaluating what patches out there, what nerf and buffs are running through the current environment, and saying what is going to be the optimal tactics, the optimal strategy given where we operate today. And the world is not static. There is no new normal. It's always been a constant change, and it's only been accentuated. That's only been increasing over the last 5-10 years. That's probably the way of the future.
Yeah. I think COVID kind of made change happen at a faster rate. Now it's just things are constantly changing, accelerating.
Yeah. I think we have a false paradigm that the world is stable. I mean, that's just because that's what we want. I don't know if that's
helps us sleep.
I don't know if it's like a consumerism psyop of it makes us more comfortable to spend money or what it is, but the world has not been static for a long time. If you just kind of step back and do a macro picture of things, every decade there's something crazy that's going on. But we think about this is the exception, not the rule, which isn't a bad way for the human psyche to operate. But it's just I wouldn't plan on running a business in a way that isn't iterative and adaptive.
I feel like you might know the answer to this question. I have no idea, but I feel like you might know it. How fast does the Earth spin? How fast is it rotating?
I think I have no idea. So first
I thought that might be
second
something.
thing would be it's all relative, right? And so this is their talk. People who probably don't like me or really probably don't like me because I don't know,
because of this.
a bunch of weird things, but the Earth obviously moves fast, right? So I don't know if you said it's the way that it moves around the sun or the way that it's rotating on its axis, but if we go the way that how fast it's moving around the sun, that's relative to what, right? So it's you could be on a ship, let's say you're on a ship that's moving 20 miles an hour, right? But you're running the opposite direction at 10 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Right. So relative to a stationary point, right? You're not going that fast, right? You're not moving 10 miles an hour. You're also not going 20 miles an hour. You're science, it's science.
Yeah.
But anyways, it's gonna be all relative. That will be my answer. Anyways, why did you ask that question?
I asked the question because we look around and everything looks stable. It looks like we're in this spot, but when you recognize that the Earth itself is moving, and not only is that actually moving around the sun, that you're actually spinning while it moves, you see, this kind of idea of a static environment is totally non-existent. But our perception, I look out the window right now and the tree's just sitting there, the telephone pole's just sitting there. Everything looks like it's static, but at the same time, we're moving super fast. I just don't know how fast.
Yeah, there's kind of a loss of perspective, I would say, of time too. Well, what did that tree look like 20 years ago? right? Was
Yeah.
that there 20 years ago? What kind of current was it running? What kind of data was streaming across it 20 years ago? Probably a lot different. Like sometimes we lose that perspective of decades and generations, where it just feels like the world we're in has always been, right? And like this is
Yeah.
just normal. And
Generalize or extrapolate or
yeah,
whatever.
this world was like what you're looking at is not as permanent as it may appear. And then like yeah, you get through the mind trip of like we're on this giant spaceship that's been terraformed and
Yeah.
flying through space, and like you know, science is a great tool. It often opens us up to how much we don't know, and yeah, how much we don't know about what's going on, outside of space.
Yeah.
Which is it's just good. It's good to again. I think it's actually healthy for the human psyche to have some kind of grounding, obviously, so not be like freaked out all the time. Um, but I think that's what like psychedelic drugs will do sometimes is they like remove your grounding on what you believe is super stable and just reintroduce you to that concept of novelty of is what if this isn't stable, right? What if that tree is not always there? What did this area that where your office is look like 30 years ago? What do you think will look like 30 years from now? A lot of times we have this like false sense of permanence and false sense of security. It's probably healthy for us. It's probably and again, I don't know if it's like the human condition or if it's a giant psyop by capitalism, but it certainly is something that I think we all share. That's good to be challenged.
You're gonna become a Sharma and lead a like a PCA retreat out into the desert with a lot of psychedelic drugs.
Well, so I've
Revamp.
never done. I'm actually not. I've had good discussions with people about psychedelics. I personally haven't gone into that realm. I'm not super opposed to it, but I have some arguments that I need to fully flesh out. But I think I'm against it. I am a big fan of meditation, right? And so I've fasted. I've done meditations. I've done cold exposure, heat exposure. Uh, those things I think are very similar to when I've talked to people about some of the mental experiences they've achieved on through synthetic means or through artificial means. I think a lot can be achieved. Maybe that's like the shamans of old, but I think they also were taking consumables as well. So
Sure.
yeah, I'm a big fan of just what do you call it? Whether we really call it flow or altered states of consciousness. So much of our day is just linear, logical problem solving, which is super helpful in the day to day. But to take some space, whether it's once a day, once a week, once a quarter, once a year, to get into like an intentional altered state of consciousness, altered state of mind, I think is super healthy as well.
Yeah, kind of allow you to see things from a different perspective, break all your mental barriers, so to speak. We have things pretty much locked in. I want to kind of approach things from, I guess, a little bit of a different perspective. There's sort of a debate or kind of seems like this natural, I don't know, almost naturally opposing forces, or not really opposing forces, but one is really focused on the craft. So focused on the actual painting, the actual process of what you're delivering, and really becoming obsessed with that, right? And becoming obsessed with being the best at that. I know we have some people in the PCA that really specialize in that, promote it, teach it, and really promote being a craftsman. And then there's this other side that can seem contradictory. Again, it doesn't have to be, but it can seem contradictory, which is really focused on the business. So it's focused on, all right, how do you sell and market it? How do you make it scalable? And how do you kind of make it, I guess, good enough to where the customer's happy, but you're not obsessed. You're not necessarily actually the best painter in that state, or really even in that city, but you're good and you present a good picture to the consumer. What do you think about that dichotomy, and especially as more entrants come into the painting space?
Yeah, those people sound super obnoxious.
Which ones sound obnoxious?
The business person,
The
obviously.
business person's obnoxious. Okay.
Because everybody like there's like a humility and like a general like for someone who's just focused on the craft, and they're both that neither one is right or wrong. I think the one critique I'd give to those individuals that are focused on the craft is they're not charging enough, and
Okay.
I've just in like 99.999%, right?
Mm-hmm.
People I've talked to that are like craftsmanship focused. If you're going to focus on the craft, it's like you're not going to scale a company off of that, but you can increase your hourly rate a lot.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's like it's always an odd scenario when I'm like Paris Painting is charging more per hour than like someone who's for the last 30 years of their life they're like testing out what type of brush works with this and
It's
that.
perfected it.
They're like licking the wood before they like scrape it so that it gets the right moisture. I don't know. Like there's all
Yeah.
these crazy things. I'm like, it's kind of odd that you're not the Paris Painting is charging more per hour, right?
Sure.
And it's like I'm you, that's like a hyper specialized skill that people are going to pay a lot for. And so that's the one critique I'd have because they're just different,
They
right?
should probably be hitting that top of that top. You know, the people
Yeah,
who value
it's hard to, I mean,
quality.
you're talking about like niches versus a general service, right? So if you niche
Yeah.
down, hyper specialize of like, every person on our team, there's 4 people, they each have a story of how they've grown up and they sleep with their paintbrush. And I'm like, people are going to pay a lot of money for that,
Yeah.
right? But you can't scale a company to stability and scalability off of that model, right? Because those are just hyper unique individuals. At the same time, you can't offer a large general service and charge a premium dollar, right? There's actually a pretty high ceiling what you can charge. That's largely like painters have not done a great job of testing that market. You can also charge quite a bit for the convenience, right? So if you're able to offer a service based on a quick timeline, right, authentic times, you can charge a high premium for that because you've been able to build out your economies of scale and you have that infrastructure to offer that service. So you have like the service of like the craftsman orientatedness. Yep. You also have the service that a large entity offers, right? One of the would be scheduling, potential scheduling opportunity.
Convenience, basically.
But I would say neither one is right or wrong. They're just different. Right?
Yeah.
And I'd just say the second one sounds more obnoxious.
Second one sounds more.
You just have to be careful, right? If you're coming to the painting industry and like I'm just gonna focus on the business side, that can be like it sounds like you're talking down to people, right? Sure. That's where I'm always trying to be careful because it's like, well, it's not like everybody doesn't know how to do things.
Sure.
You don't have to be so obnoxious. Maybe that's what I sound like a lot of times.
Sure. So I think most of the people who are listening to this podcast are focused at least on growing their businesses, right, in some capacity. So if they were focused purely on the craft, they probably are not a listener of this. So let's say someone's kind of newer to this space and they're really a business person coming into the painting space. How do they quality control? If their mind really is on that business, on that business mindset, how do they, while they're growing, while they're kind of building their infrastructure, while they're a process oriented person, they're using all the software and technology you talked about, they are getting educated through the PCA and the Facebook groups and everything like that. How do they also ensure that their quality, especially while scaling, while growing fast, how do they make sure their quality doesn't become subpar?
Yeah, I think a little bit starts like, what is your end goal? What do you want to do? So if you want to make as much money as you can over the next 5 years, that's not as big of an issue, just to call a spade a spade, right?
When you just gut the market, just run through it and don't care.
As cash as you possibly can over the next 5 years, just you do.
And then head to Mexico.
Go hard.
Yeah.
I'd say there's 2 challenges with that. So there's like two reasons why I think what you're saying is a good question. One, as you scale a company over time, your brand equity becomes extremely valuable, right? So how well can you get repeat referral business? That's going to have a pretty big impact to your bottom line year over year. It also is going to affect the stability of your company for long haul. What kind of ethos? Obviously, one of the maintain lines that we say at all holdings that I'm not a big proponent of is, who cares about the cash? What I'm really interested in is stable passive income, right? And so like the cash for 1 year, it's like whatever, that was fun. What really has high value in a painting company is how stable and consistent are those profits going to be for the next decades, right? And so to have that, you obviously have to have a high level brand equity. I could get into all the practical. One way that would probably be maybe like a novel concept for some of your listeners would be having individuals that are specifically hired to work against the interests of others in the company. So everyone should be rowing in the same direction philosophically because they should all have some part of their compensation tied to margin, right? On like the senior management side, you do net profit. Most people can't control that, so you're tied to margin. The second thing you would have them tied into is net promoter score, or basically client satisfaction in layman's term.
Yep.
But oftentimes, even those bonuses can be weighted in certain ways where so it's in the best interest of an individual might be against the best interest of the company, right? They say, well, I'm willing to forego my net promoter score bonus because if I run 20 crews instead of 14 crews, I'm not going to get my net promoter score, but I'll get this much more bonus on my margin. Right?
Yep.
So you hire individuals that are like client care or customer service that work against the interests of those individuals. And so this is one practical one is we have an escalation process at Paris Painting where someone calls in or we get, we're very, we're like spies or like big brothery in our company. So if we catch wind of some intercommunication that's happening between a PM, a sales rep, a coordinator, and client that like shows frustration, as we call it, that can get escalated. once it's escalated, it's out of that PM's hands, out of that sales rep's hands, out of that coordinator's hands, and it's now in the hands of the client service rep, who's going to do whatever is necessary to make that a positive experience for the client, right? Even to the detriment of those individuals, right? Even to the detriment of the company's bottom line, right? They're kind of operating as like an owner's rep. So typically, this is a role that an owner or a founder would play. Right? They're going to step in and say, like, hey, we're going to forego some short-term profits for long-term brand equity here.
And you've given them leeway to basically what they're able to do.
Yep. Yeah. They're good. Yeah. They have that control. And obviously, within CAPS, there's different layers of management, approval, gates, as you would call it. But like in Paris Painting, I'm an absentee owner, so there's nothing that I'm involved in the day-to-day on. But I still want my desires represented, and so you hire these kind of owners reps or client care service people. That have your best. They have the long-term brand equity at heart, because your team is awesome, right? Every company is a family, as you would say. But if individuals have a chance to make more money for their job over the next 3 years, so like over the next 3 years, we have the opportunity to make 20% more income. Most humans are going to take that. Very few people are going to say, like, yeah, we could all make 20% more profits for the next 3 years, but that could really bite us 10 years from now. But, thinking long term, especially if they don't have an equity stake in the company. Sure. So you want those interests represented within the company. How do you architect that? How do you set up those structures? It's going to be different on every single side, but customer surveys help. But ultimately, we found what's really helpful is having someone with the big stick, the big bat, that can come in and just say, I'm in control now, representing the owner, and you guys screwed up. Now we're going to make it painful.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. Yeah, because otherwise you can end up like let's use the like an estimator sales role as an example. They could overpromise, right, to close a deal. They could overpromise. They could offer things or a service that really don't fit, and then you come in and your production manager really isn't able to meet that, and then now you have a dissatisfied customer. But the salesperson, the estimator, might not really care because they're on this kind of short term, next year, 2 years, how much can they make? But now in the process, they're kind of killing your brand equity.
Yeah, even their compensation structure. So let's say you pay them a percentage of revenue that they sell. It's actually really easy to sell work when you promise a lot and charge a little.
Yeah. It's
just, I'm going to promise you a lot. I'm going to charge you a low amount, and I'm going to sell a lot of that. Right? What it takes skill, right? The skill of sales is I'm going to promise you very little. I'm going to charge you a lot for that. Right? That's a skill of sales. The other one's like giving stuff away. And so if you compensate someone on the revenue, right, they're going to feel it when they can't charge as much, but maybe their success ratio is higher, and so they're actually selling more per appointment or per unit of effort that they're feeling, or just they don't have to hold conflict. Or oftentimes clients will like say something and they'll just let it slide as opposed to digging. It's like, well, hold on, when you say that you are expecting this, what does that mean to you? Right? That's a skill of sales, to really dive into those unspoken, nuanced expectations and draw them out and get super clear. That's like conflict sometimes, right?
Sure.
To skill somebody up in that is not easy. But if you compensate them, the way we compensate all of our sales reps are cost on margin, right? And so we have a threshold that they need to be at compared to the margin of a job. So just for like easy numbers, let's say take all the margin of the job, and the sales rep has to be less than, let's just say 20% of that, right? So say the job that made $100. It's like, well, sales rep, we have to pay you $20 or less for that $100, right? Now, if you're out there making wild promises, guess what happens to the margin of that job? It's likely going to go down, right? Yeah. Unhappy clients typically don't pay more; they pay less. If the owner's rep, that customer service person gets involved, that's like they're just coming with the hammer and just smacking the margins of the job, right? They're just hacking away at it. If the labor is like given a curveball, they're typically like more open to negotiating hard with the PM, right? You have like unexpected change orders on a job site. Labor is not like, oh, I'll take less money for this unknown thing that I have leverage over on, right? So that's like, there's ways to just architect things in a healthy way, or architect things in a way where everybody's going to go in the same boat. That'd be one example.
Yeah. I love that, man. Well, I appreciate this. This has been incredible. Do you have anything else to add? We have 2 more episodes coming up, but anything else to add specifically tied to, the influx of new talent into the industry, the idea of the Wild West getting settled here, and how painting companies can adapt to thrive in the coming years?
Yeah, I'll say this to kind of dovetail into the next episode. So I think one thing that's going to really drive top level talent and influx of problem solvers and and top level entrepreneurs into this industry is the harvesting of their equity, right? And so most people are not getting into painting to build a business and then either partner with a company or cash out or get in place a management team that can allow them to become passive. Right? Most people get into painting. It's often found, not sought. But if they did get into it, it's to get a nice lifestyle business, right? To make as much money as you can with working as least amount as you can to compensate you for your role, whether it's president, visionary, whatever it may be. But that concept of being able to harvest the inherent value of equity in painting companies, I think is a paradigm shifter for most of the industry. And I think that's going to draw top level talent in. And so I just want to acknowledge, because this will be a nice time capsule, in 2022, the equity of painting companies is not a major driver for how people operate, much less what drives people into the industry. And that's not going to be the case 5-10 years from now. People are going to be like, okay, this is something that should be top of mind. It should be something that is both a driver of talent, but also affects how they navigate the business once it's up and running. I think that will honestly be the biggest shift, right? Because then you start to get the capitalists right into the game, and capital is always like trying to like seek and find, and like it's like this manic desire to get a return on capital, right? It's kind of what makes the world go around at a speed that's unknown to us, both obviously. But the fact that painting companies can be that, they're solid investments, they can get good cash on cash returns, they can build real stable equity value. That's a paradigm shift that I think is going to really turbo boost the industry. Companies will get a lot more professional. It's going to happen quickly, and it's going to be more competitive, but we're all going to like it. We're all going to appreciate it, right? And it's just acknowledging what's coming up. This is happening in every industry as it's professionalized. Call it farming, call it brewing. Actually, the financial services are pretty similar. I don't know if we talked about that in the last episode, but one of the guys in the office, he was telling me how the financial services used to be the Wild West 15 years ago, and now it's much more normalized. But yeah, that's kind of what I'll leave us with, is just a plug for the next episode. We're going to talk about, I think, building a company to sell, starting with the end in mind, whether it's on taking on a minority partner, a majority operator, complete sellout, or placing in a management team that allows you to get passive. How do you harvest that ongoing equity of the company through stable passive income?
Yeah, I'm really excited for the next episode. Well, Jason, thank you for your time, man. This was incredible as always.
A+ work. Thanks, Brandon.
Appreciate it, man.
If you want to learn more about the topics we discussed in this podcast and how you can use them to grow your painting business, visit paintermarketingpros.com/podcast for free training, as well as the ability to schedule a personalized strategy session for your painting company. Again, that URL is paintermarketingpros.com/podcast. Hey there, painting company owners. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Give us your feedback. Let us know how we did. And also, if you're interested in taking your painting business to the next level, make sure you visit the Painter Marketing Pros website at paintermarketingpros.com to learn more about our services. You can also reach out to me directly by emailing me at brandon@paintermarketingpros.com, and I can give you personalized advice on growing your painting business. Until next time, keep growing.